Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Feeling Seen, the podcast about the movies that make us feel seen. And today, my guest is a veteran producer of film and television and is also a writer-director in their own right with the new Misadventures of Bucky and Bean to be showcasing at film festivals. You are also Lisa M. Thomas, the president and co-founder of Thin Edge Films, which you have led for, I think, a couple of decades now. What else do the people need to know about you before we get started here today?
October is my favorite month.
Well, congratulations. Welcome to October. Welcome to October.
What do they need to know? I mean, I've been working in film and television for quite a while. I sort of started on the West Coast and grew up in the Seattle area and then moved to Los Angeles and then in 99 came to New York. So it's most of my years kind of working in the industry has been on the East Coast, but I originate kind of from the Northwest, Seattle Northwest scene, you know?
I, too, originate from the Northwest. I'm from just south of Portland, Oregon.
Very cool.
And now, what was it about what you wanted to pursue specifically with film and television that made New York the hub for you, as opposed to sort of, I suppose, obviously there's plenty going on in New York, sort of conventional wisdom, go to Hollywood, go to LA, do the film business. What about the East Coast was more the appeal for you?
I was in Los Angeles kind of in the late 90s for a couple years, and being from the Northwest, people were just like, you're probably going to come back up here. It's just like a totally different vibe down there. Like, I'm sure it won't
I hear that a lot.
I'm sure it won't work out. And I didn't really want my friends to be right. So I did this sort of hop, skip, and jump to New York. But within like days, I felt like I met my people when I hit New York. Like in the sense that, you know, when I was in Los Angeles, I was there for a couple years and it sort of felt like if you couldn't really do a lot for somebody, you know, if you weren't like a mover and shaker, people weren't really like bringing you into the fold. But like the first job within the very first week I was in New York that I worked on, which was this HBO short with James Gandolfini, like those people just like brought me in. They were like, come to the barbecue after, like, let's connect you to all the people that we know. And you, Lisa, meet this producer and that person. And like, it was more sort of like community, the indie film world, or like at least the people that I first connected to when I first got into New York were very like open arms and welcoming. And I was like, wow, this is such a different feeling than what I just experienced in Los Angeles, which is sort of like, you can't do something to greenlight our project, then we're going to talk to the next person over there, you know? So yeah, I think that's why I sort of like remained in New York.
Well, tell me, speaking of the new, tell me about the Misadventures of Bucky and Bean. Tell the folks at home who have not watched it about this project that you've cooked up.
Yeah, so the Misadventures of Bucky and Bean is about these two very outspoken queer DJs, Pepper Buckthorn and Jellybean, who have a pirate radio station in upstate New York.
Are you gay? Oh, we got a caller.
You're on the line with Bucky and Bean.
Hi, it's Tim.
Tim Gunn? Is that you?
I'm sick of these liberal types. They're taking over.
Gender fluidity is all the rage these days, but my husband is convinced that it's nonsense.
You're not just gonna stand by and let her align with their gay agenda.
I'm done!
God! Little birdie told me they might be transmitting out of that farm in Freehold. We should pay them a visit.
Are you gay?
Fascinating.
And they're just, you know, being themselves and talking their talk, and they kind of get into a little hot water because the good old boys hear what's on this like this station, and they're like not having it, like they're just like not feeling like the vibe. And so they kind of get themselves in a little bit of peril, and I think it's kind of my response to like really what's happening in the country. And it's a comedy, and I think it's a little bit of you know, when you think of like locker room talk that guys have, you know, about girls, it's sort of like how the queer community sometimes feels when they hear straight people talking about them and how, you know, like them having these like conversations with themselves about like, can you believe that so-and-so said that? But I feel like that sort of stuff just doesn't really get out that much, like in a mainstream way. I mean, I'm sure it's like going all around social media and those kind of places. But yeah, it was very fun to write. And it's really my response to sort of like where we are in this country right now with like kind of these polar factions that just really can't see eye to eye. And my hope is that if it's a pilot, for a series that I want to, go into a series. And my hope is if it gets picked up or gets going, that we can really like have a dialogue about what's really going on. There's really probably more similarities that we have than differences, and I really want people to come together, not to be further apart. So it's my way of kind of like starting the conversation about like what are our commonalities, and how can we not kill each other?
Well, and a thing that I was enjoying so much about watching it was and in conjunction with the movie that you brought to discuss, which I'd known about but I had never seen, and am so glad to have watched it now. It is Ma Vie en Rose from 1997, a French film.
J'en souligne les passages au crayon rose. Le bonheur m'obsède à la névrose. Là où il y a du gris, je mets du rose.
And this, watching Bucky and Bean, felt like watching the sort of bright colored queer independent movies of the 1990s. Like I was thinking like The Misadventures of Two Girls in Love, and not in like 2000s, but like I always forget it's a 2000s movie because it feels so of the Itty Bitty Titty Committee.
Yeah.
And that sense of like sort of getting up to something and watching like life unfold, and amongst strange scenarios from there, and sort of there's a sort of unencumbered free-spiritedness and playfulness about it that made me think of a queer film, independent queer film time that, I don't know, it feels like I kind of cling on to for its tangibility and its sense of possibility. And so I wanted to hear from you about Ma Vie en Rose as a start, and your touch point of talking about that character of Ludovic.
Ludovic, yeah. Okay, so I saw that film in a theater in Portland, Oregon.
Ah, okay.
When I think I was an undergrad. I don't know. I was visiting, and I had friends that I went to Evergreen State College. That was my undergrad school. And I would go down sometimes to Portland and visit friends. And I saw this film, and it was like the first time, like I've never considered myself transgender or trapped in my body or anything like that. But when I saw this kid that was sort of like, young boy wanting to be a girl kind of thing, like I was always sort of a tomboy growing up. And it was like the first time where I was just like, oh, I really identify with this character. Like this kid is so much more me than 99.9% of the kids that I see on TV or in film. Mm-hmm. And, not that I ran around like dressing up and flying in the air on all the things that Ludovic does, and gets, has to move out of town and the whole thing. But I do remember conversations growing up of people saying to me things like, Lisa, you really shouldn't be playing football with the boys with your shirt off. Sure. That's stuff that only boys do. And, things like that, just kind of getting messy and dirty with the boys and being constantly told that I should be playing with dolls. And I had no interest in the dolls. And, I just was sort of interested in the things that the boys got to do. Like, oh, they get to go camping and make cars and get dirty and roll around and all this stuff. And I'm like, why can't girls do all that stuff? And so, that was the first time where I think I really sat in a theater and I was like, that's speaking to me, in a very different way than like most films that I had seen before.
Qu'est-ce qu'il y a, Ludovic?
Un jour, je me marierai pour de vrai avec Jérôme.
Quoi? Alors maman avait raison, tu m'as menti. Je t'ai déjà dit qu'un garçon, ça se marie pas avec un autre garçon. Enfin, parfois, mais...
Mais je serai une fille.
Écoute, je veux plus entendre ce genre d'ineptie. Tu es un garçon, tu resteras un garçon toute ta vie.
Yeah, it's quite simple. It's the story of a family that has, a French family that has just moved to, it seems like kind of like a shiny suburb. It's a little bit like it's upper middle class, maybe not quite posh, but it's upper middle class for sure. And there are 4 kids in the family, in addition to the 2 parents. And Ludovic is the youngest. And it's such a like the movie starts in such a wonderful way. It just throws you into this where they're the new family on the block, and they're having like a housewarming out in their yard, and a block party basically, and the parents get up there to introduce themselves, and kind of it's like a little cotillion, like they're introducing all their children to the neighborhood, and they introduce Ludovic, who comes out in a pretty dress, and he's done his makeup, and he is, he's feeling beautiful, and his parents they laugh, and they're like, oh, he's just such a prankster. He's, what a jokester. He does things like this all the time.
Lui, c'est Ludovic, le fort en farce. Il fait toujours ça. C'est une farce.
Ludovic, qu'est-ce que tu en fais là?
And then it's just this very, like, local story of this family having to come to terms with the fact that, like, this is not a phase, and it is an unrelenting feeling and desire of Ludovic, this certainty in them that they are a little girl. And there's this wonderful fantastical element to it where Ludovic imagines himself going into basically like a Ken and Barbie's dreamland where they're the white bride, and they're marrying Ken, and in this it's like Ben, and they're Ben and Pam, I think, and they're like holding hands and skipping off with Pam. And it was just I was so worried it was going to veer toward horrific tragedy, because that's just where my fearful mind is right now. But it was manageable heartbreak in a really beautiful, small coming of age film.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I do remember for myself, my mom used to always dress us up on holidays, and we would all have to be in matching colored outfits. So for Easter, for example, my sister and I would have to be in these little yellow dresses, and then my brother and dad and mom or whatever, they would have, the yellow accents too. Like my dad would have a yellow sports coat. My mom would have yellow bonnets and for all the girls. And, my brother would have a yellow tie on it. And I always just was like, oh my God, when can I get out of these clothes? Can I bury these little patent leather shoes that I had been forced to wear? The whole thing, it just was enough. I couldn't get out of these clothes fast enough and back into my jeans or whatever, So yeah, I mean, it's not totally the same, but could definitely relate to this little kid,
And were you at that point in the 90s, were you wading into queer cinema? Were you taking in many films like this, or is this at the beginning of something? What's your sort of scope on gay movies at that time, with the sort of new queer cinema movement is thriving and the Wachowskis are making Bound, but where are you at as a film consumer at that time? Well,
at that time, I wasn't out of the closet. So that for me, seeing that film was what is this? If I identify with this character, what does that mean about me? Right. So I wasn't really watching those other films yet. I mean, obviously now I've seen most of them, but it felt very taboo. I shouldn't be watching it, or I was suddenly having these feelings, or maybe some inkling or understanding of myself that I didn't know if I could even articulate or express to anybody yet. So it was the first time that I think I was starting to be I think there's something going on with me that I'm not addressing, or that I'm not being honest about. But yeah, then, I slowly started to see some of the other films of that time or whatever. And then, eventually I came out in my 20s and stuff, but it took a moment, it wasn't just automatic. I think back in that era, it wasn't as accepted as it is now. And even though rights are being rolled back today or whatever, I think there's still a lot more acceptance with people knowing that, queer people are here, and it's not just going to go away or whatever. So people very much were not out. I don't remember anybody in my high school, for example, being saying that they were queer or gay or anything. Even though there were some people you were sort of I really think I know that one boy, is probably,
Yeah.
but nobody talked about it. Like nobody spoke about it. It was this like unspoken thing that you just didn't bring up. Right. So
that was the time. And so when did you like, you come out later in your 20s, like when did making art that was aligned with being like with queer representation and a queer forward perspective, when did that start becoming important to you as a maker yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I started Thin Edge Films in 2000 with my my then partner Margot Pelletier, who has since passed away. Our first film was this political documentary, but the next feature that we made was a film called Thirsty about a drag queen who impersonates Cher. And we shot that film in 2013. And I would say that was really the beginning of when I started to feel like I wanted to do this type of work. And that was really when it kind of took hold, and I even remember saying like before the pandemic, I don't really have the luxury or the time to just kind of keep making whatever people come and talk to me about. I mean, obviously I have to pay the bills and take the jobs that come my way, but like I don't want to just be running around doing random, genre films just, on my own for my own company that are just about making money. Like I really want to put out work that forwards dialogue and specifically because I identify as queer, that's from my experience and kind of from my own voice. So I feel like the older I've gotten, the more it matters to me that that's what I'm talking about and not just making film for the sake of just entertainment, let's say,
Well, and what, like with working with Adult Swim, it's such a, like that's not necessarily Cartoon Network. Like, I remember when Adult Swim, I think I remember when that first came out and, like, watching things from it, like, things I felt like I hadn't seen before. Like uncomfortable and sort of daring and Adult Swim. This is animation for grown-ups. And I did grow up watching, like, Ren and Stimpy, which my mom absolutely hated that I watched because she was like, Jordan, this is disgusting. Like, this is disgusting. This isn't funny. This is too weird. And then Adult Swim became this haven for really weird alternative straight, like, so I wanted to hear from you about the sort of creative development of working around that kind of media.
Yeah.
And the sort of like, I feel like with animation, there's a kind of boundlessness to it. Like you're working with, like, it's not like these aren't people, these aren't human beings, these are drawn realities. So I wanted to hear about that as an influence on you as a writer, producer, director.
Oh, I'm sure it's had a huge influence. I've done a lot of projects with Adult Swim and, in particular with a production company called PFR, who were the people that developed this show called Wonder Chosen, which was on MTV2. And we did the crazy show Xavier Renegade Angel and the stop motion series called Shivering Truth. And the last thing I did with them was this show called Teenage Euthanasia. Their stuff is very subversive, kind of smart and political. And there's no way that it hasn't had an influence on me because I've worked with them for so long. And, we're kind of, going on over 20 years of kind of collaborating on all this insanity, right? And, part of what we're doing with those shows is, yes, we're making something that we hope that people find entertaining and funny and this and that, but we're also sort of jabbing a little bit at, like, poking at society. And I kind of want to do the same thing with Misadventures. I just, it's not just about like, let's be fun and funny and like suddenly be neighbors and like, go make a bunk cake or whatever. Like we're trying to actually like address issues of our times a little bit. So, I think that's where some of what I do producing for my day job with other people kind of relates to my own work in some ways. You know what I mean?
think it was last year sometime, I was reading like something on the internet. It was a thoughtfully written piece that was kind of responding to the notion of veiled queerness as opposed to like explicit queerness. And this person that I was reading was sort of making this case for like, we need more, like we get it. Like we want queer people loud, proud, out front and center. But they were making this case for media that was either coded queer or veiled queer as something that we should not fully abandoned as something that like, well, we don't need that anymore because like we would love to think that acceptance is everywhere, and especially among young people who it's like, oh yeah, they don't care anymore. Maybe they do, but also maybe definitely older people around them do, who they live in their homes, they go to their schools kind of things. And I just kind of wanted to hear from you about like the role of kind of veiled or coded, since you got to the aspect of sort of subversion in some of the creators that you've worked with as a producer, but like the role of veiled or coded queer media at a time when we feel like the sort of inevitable march forward is more and more explicit and more obvious, but perhaps when we have to smuggle things more amid an oppressive regime locking down our outlets of expression. So I want to hear if you noodle around on that.
Yeah, I mean, I was in a film festival earlier this year where somebody said, you're going to have a tough road with your project because it's so blatantly out there. And
right.
It's like, it's so kind of just radical in a way. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I mean, are we not supposed to just be allowed to be ourselves and be free and like say the things that we actually say to each other, like in media and film and whatever? Like, do we have to just be kind of tiptoeing around this? And I feel like those days, like, I mean, I don't feel like I have time for that anymore. Like,
sure.
Oh, maybe you are, maybe you aren't, like whatever. Like, no, it's just like, I'm here, I'm queer, I'm your neighbor. Like, I pay my taxes, like I contribute to society, like, whatever. And like, if you can't be seen, like, how can people like ever get to know, like, how you're just, more or less another person just like them? You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, sure, there are people that are gender fluid and kind of, like live in both worlds or whatever. But even that, I think a lot of people, really don't discuss very much. Like even that is not very accepted, right? Because people want you to be like one thing or another. And so I don't know. I just think we need to have more dialogue just in general. It's why there's so much misunderstanding in our world. And if we're like coding everything and like in that way and kind of hiding ourselves or cloaking ourselves, I don't think it helps matters much, I'll give you like this really weird example of something that happened to me. It was like around this time last year. So I was at a bonfire and somebody, who was hosting it or whatever, didn't really know me. And they're like, oh, where do you live? Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, I'm in this house, down the road across from this nature preserve. And they were like, oh, the house that those two lesbians used to own. You bought that? And I was like, it was as if it was a little bit like, oh, but you've got that now. And it's not, they don't have it anymore. And I was like, well, first of all, I've been there for like 23 years. So I guess I'm one of those two that you're talking about. The other one is, I was like, let me catch up real fast. The other one's dead. And I don't even identify as lesbian. I identify as queer, kind of, whatever, gender fluid. But I was just like, it was some straight person just saying this kind of like, they didn't even care about who we were, the names or whatever. Just, oh, the house with the two lesbians? You bought that? You got that place? I'm like, yeah, I've actually been there for a long time. I guess I'm that person that's how you've been referring to me, And I just like, I think, when you do that thing where you're just sort of like, oh, the person over there, that's the other, whether it's like about race or about gender or sexuality or whatever it is, because it's classism and they're poor. And so, like they're other and you're not going to deal with them because they have a different reality or something different from them than you. It's what divides us. And so, a lot of times too, like, I feel like people are like, surprised in a way that like, I'm of the community or queer or whatever, because it's not really obvious to them. And it's like, sure. I want people to just get that, like, people in the queer community are your neighbors, they're teachers, they're like, your family and your friends and whatever. And like, you just can't treat them like the other, the enemy, whatever. So I feel like more and more it's just become more important to me. And when in the past people would say things like that to me, I probably would have not responded. I would have just let it go. But I just went right back at them and was like, yeah, that's me. Yeah, that's me. And I'm now at your bonfire. Chin chin, let's have a drink. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, we're both standing here and like, I'm sure we have more in common than we don't, like. Right. Yeah. So I think like the older I get, the more I'm just like, I'm not going to hide who I am. And for what? I don't think that helps,
It's time for a short break, but Lisa and I will be right back to cover more of our unapologetically queer agenda. Then at the end, I will have one quick thing before I go about the only thing I could have anything to say about it this time, which is the passing of the dear and legendary Diane Keaton. So stick around at the end for just a few words of tribute.
Amber Celeste Nash, welcome to the afterlife.
Oh, snap.
I have before me the record of all your worldly achievements. The voice of Pampoothie on Archer. I must say, we're all big fans of yours up here.
Great. Swing open those pearly gates, you big-winged son of a bitch.
Bip, bip, not so fast. It says here that you've never hosted your own podcast?
I did some other cool stuff, but no, I never got around to making a podcast.
You are hereby sentenced to relive your entire life. Only this time, host a damn podcast.
Okay. That's why we should do an Archer Rewatch podcast. We should call it Rephrasing, and we could even do it with MaximumFun.org.
Let's just do the podcast for normal reasons.
Okay, Grandma.
The wizards answer 8 by 8. The conclaves call to demonstrate their arcane gift, their single spell. They number 64. Until a conflagration, 63, and 62 they soon shall be, as one by one the wizards die, till one remains to reign on high.
Join us for Taz Royale, an Oops All Wizards Battle Royale season of the Adventure Zone, every other Thursday on MaximumFun.org or wherever you get your podcasts.
It's such the local portrait that you're watching in Ma Vie en Rose of like these people move into the neighborhood, and there's absolutely nothing different from this white nuclear family than any other of the white nuclear families that are around them on this block. And you watch them, relate to each other in this very suburban way. They're having, kickback in the afternoon. The ladies are drinking together. Like, the men are, like, kind of gruff and obnoxious with each other a little bit. And, the kids are all playing in the yard. And you just watch where, like, there's nothing that should create a separation between these people. Except this little child, Ludovic, knows in their soul that they are a little girl. And it's so like the movie does this really neat little trick of halfway through when sort of like the bubble really bursts and this becomes like a challenge for this whole family. They become almost like shunned by their community. Right. The movie goes from being really brightly colored to like tungsten. Everything is in like this blue filter. It looks very much like a 2000s horror movie. Everything is in this kind of like sickly cold filter. And it is such a way like, and it flips over to that as you're watching like this family march out of a school auditorium after a little like school performance gone awry. And the entire school is like marching them out of this building and kind of like shooing them away. And it's like nothing changed. Nothing changed between the time you all walked into that auditorium, the time you walked out. A little child did something, they made a mistake in I won't spoil it, you guys. You should see this movie from 1997. But it just like, that notion of, it's so heartbreaking to watch how much people can have in common, how willing so many people are to wipe the slate clean when they find the one thing that is different enough for them to not understand.
Right. And actually, I'm like, differences are so beautiful, so why do we want to all be the same? You know what I mean? Like, come on, like really, seriously, like, isn't traveling and seeing other cultures and other people and other ways of living and all of that just amazing? Like, why do we want to be all so homogenous, So... yeah.
And what do you find is, because Bucky and Bean it's fun. Like they're like you said, they end up in there's a bit of peril. Like there is violence not far from where our protagonists sit in this story, but it is lighthearted and it is fun, and we are joking, and we're sort of in the in-world of queer vernacular that folks share among one another that they might not necessarily be having those kinds of conversations like out at the straight bar their friend took them to kind of situation.
Right.
Where do you find is a sort of dividing line for you between like expression of queer joy and expression of like reality of queer sorrow? And like, what do you like, because both are important. One conveys a kind of like, this is the stakes of what we're dealing with. The other is, this is the beauty of who we are. And I want to hear from you about like, there's such an abundance of sad queer cinema.
Okay, I have a lot to say about this.
Please, yes. Oh, yes.
I really love all the films that sort of have come before that have sort of shaped queer cinema or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I do have a little bit of an issue with so many of them ending in tragedy. Where
particularly for the lesbians, particularly for the lesbians,
somebody's dead or somebody's getting incarcerated or they've murdered somebody. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but me and my queer community are not doing these things. Like, we are not like, serial killers. We are not like, and yes, obviously there are terrible things that are going on, but there's terrible things going on with all communities. I really want this to not end in tragedy. Like Bucky and Bean, and in this series, like they're going to get in some hot water, but I want things to sort of work out in the end. I don't want somebody, like a front page headline, like missing and, all like, but, and never to turn up like Laura Palmer in Twin Peaks or something,
yeah.
No, I mean, I want it to work out because we have to work this stuff out. Like, what's the options? Like, you know what I mean? So, I think that's the reason why I kind of lean into this sort of campy fun sort of aspect with it, where all the characters are a little over the top and a little caricature, but they're all that way. Like, they're all a little campy, So, I think it's like damaging to our psyche to always end up like a victim.
Yeah. Yes.
But like, there's this comment that happens in Bucky and Bean, which was with our first caller, Sharon, right? Where they're like, just having this fun back and forth banter. And then at one point they almost are just like insinuating like, oh, are you like, where do you stand? Like, where, on the line or whatever. Yeah. Like, oh, don't insinuate to me like that I might be gay. I'm normal. Like,
yeah, I'm normal.
And it like echoes through the mountains, like as far as you can hear. And they're like, what? Did you just say? What did you just say? And it's like, normal is so many things. It is so many things.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Yeah, much to the chagrin of certain people in high-placed positions, the spectrum of what is normal has actually greatly expanded just over the course of the 21st century to be much more inclusive than even in, it's so challenging because you see like films from the 1990s and such a beautiful bloom of queer cinema from that time. And that exists on the heels of the AIDS epidemic extending into a full-blown, like a wipeout event for the gay male community specifically, and the way the queer community was entirely affected that and rallied around their gay brothers to help in that time.
Yeah.
And then you see sort of the new queer cinema arising from the ashes of that literal death, and also the villainization and the stigma that surrounded it. And so you see all this incredible art, the Greg Araki, the Todd Haynes, the Christine Vachon, who I believe you have studied under in your film master's program, and Strand Films, and you see what can come out of such horror. And there's so much creativity and vibrance. And my greatest hope is that in this time of renewed, intensified horror, that we can sort of similarly renaissance, and that there can be this bloom of cinema like we saw then that was so formative for creating a new language for how queer people could exist on screen. I remain so hopeful that from destruction, something like that can come about once again.
Yeah, and I like the sort of like layered conversations that are like, we had a scene that we did in Thirsty that came out in 2016 where, Thirsty is about the life of Scott Townsend, who performs as Thirsty Burlington, who's a Cher impersonator in Provincetown in real life. And when we interviewed Scott, we didn't want to do this documentary. We wanted to do this sort of fantastical like biopic musical of Scott's life. And he talked with us a lot about the kind of homophobia that exists within the community of, specifically with gay men who don't accept drag queens. And it is something that I feel like isn't discussed much.
It's a very interesting part of the slasher movie Hellbent from the 2000s of the most model, hot, sexiest guy of the group is going for the Halloween party that night as drag queen. And a subplot of the movie is him getting rebuffed and insulted and belittled the entire night, despite those high cheekbones, despite that jawline. He's at the West Hollywood party in drag, and he is getting knocked down a peg the entire movie for it.
Right. So, I mean, to me, those are the kind of things that really, I think, are interesting. Like even our own internal sort of like homophobia that we have to address, because it's not like we're perfect either, right? We all have our own like issues that we have to overcome from like just living in this culture and in our own families that might not all be open and open-minded and liberal or whatever. And so, like those are the things that like really intrigue me about like, where I can go and like as a filmmaker and the kind of things that I think would be great for people to discuss. Like, why is this such a threat? A man in a dress. Yeah. What does threatening about that? Really, And I remember Scott, when we talked to him, telling me that he had gone into schools and on the Cape and I think, specifically in Provincetown, talking with children. And he would say like, my job as a drag queen is not that different than a job of a fireman who goes to work to fight a fire and puts on their uniform. My uniform just happens to be a wig and a dress and some eyelashes and makeup, And I was like, that's kind of amazing. That's kind of amazing for, I think, people to hear, right? Because at the end of the day, and people would always just go, oh, that film that you did, the transgender movie that you did about that Cher person. I'm like, Thirsty is not transgender. Thirsty is a gay man that dresses up as a woman and is a drag queen and whose name is Thirsty Burlington when they do that, but lives a life as a gay man. That's a very different thing. And like, even just those differences that we all have, right? Like, there's so much misunderstanding. Like, what's the difference between someone who's a drag queen and someone who's trans or like, gender fluid or whatever. And I think that like, we have a long ways to go, obviously. Right. And even I sometimes screw up, right?
Oh, of course. Yes.
Same. Because I'm trying to be part of the conversation and I put my foot in my mouth. So, yeah.
Well, I guess my final question to you would be then, you have Peppermint in Misadventures of Bucky and Bean, and you also have, I believe that is an actual Tim Gunn voice cameo.
It is Tim, yes.
Into the radio show.
Yes.
And I wanted to hear from you about, as I guess a final thing, with you and queer collaborators that you work with, what is something that is giving you guys hope right now in people that you're making stuff with?
Oh, I mean, I'm very inspired by Peppermint. Peppermint is such an advocate and such a political force.
Incredible. We've had Peppermint on the show, and she's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. So I am like so inspired by her. Obviously, Tim is like also a hero, right? Like, and so, I mean, you know, I had no idea if Tim would say yes. I had worked with Tim in another capacity before, you know, on another project, but he really got the politics. And I think the thing is like, we can't be like going down the road of like hating ourselves or talking about how like there's nothing we can do and be negative and like everything's going to suck or whatever. Like, we kind of have to be a part of the solution in a way. Mm-hmm. And I feel like sort of the people that I like collaborating with are sort of contributing in that way. You know, trying to be examples and just lead in their lives in a very positive manner or whatever. And, you know, I want to do the same, you know, and, you know, there's a comment about like, you got to raise your like rainbow flag up and let your neighbors see or whatever. And it's kind of true, like, right? Like, if you're just like hiding out, like, you know, I had like a sign, you know, out in front of my house, like some months back, and somebody's like, you got to take that thing down. You're making yourself a target. And I'm like, why? We're in a free country, right?
Yeah.
Aren't we?
For now, yeah. Damn it.
Like, you can put whatever you want in your front yard, can't you? You know, so, you know, I think we just have to be examples of the type of people that you want to have as your neighbor, the type of people that you want to, you know, have in your own community, you know, and hope that others will get with the program that aren't the same way yet or whatever. Like, you know, like, yeah.
Well, in terms of if you're in upstate New York, Larry Fessenden is upstate New York, and I am grateful that you are doing work out there independently, that Glass Eye Picks, you guys are holding it down for the East Coast indie creator contingent. And as we have it emphasized to us over and over again, with your sign on your lawn, I am grateful that you, unlike so many people who are purportedly so much more rich and powerful, are not obeying in advance. And I appreciate you coming on the show and taking the time to talk to us today, Lisa. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks so much, Jordan. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you so much to Lisa M. Thomas. We will link to her Instagram page where you can find out more about how to catch the misadventures of Bucky and Bean. And while you're there, look out for images of Lisa's pink hearse, Ursula, which she takes around to different events as a kind of pride mobile. And who couldn't use more pride on the go in the form of a pink hearse? And now, that one quick thing before I go. Over the weekend before this episode dropped, the sudden and stunning news came through that Diane Keaton has passed. At the age of 79, it sounds like it was sudden. I don't think there's been a lot more info after the additional news break, which was on a Saturday. And my wife showed me the phone and goes, "Oh no." And we were sitting and eating lunch at a taco place on Sunset here in LA. And I just fell silent. I was just stunned and I started to cry. And oh God, you know, as an elder millennial, we are certainly, my age group is certainly getting to that point where the people that we grew up with who we knew were a big deal, who were big deals to our parents, and we grew up with as these like grown-up movie stars that we watched in movies we might see with, again, our own parents, not necessarily the ones that came up with us, you know, the Lindsay Lohans, the the set of aughts figures that became adults alongside us, but the ones who were already like a couple Oscars deep by the time we found our love of cinema. Those of us who went that route. And Diane Keaton was absolutely one of the most beloved figures of my household. The Father of the Bride movies were essential viewing. 1 and 2. Couldn't pick one over the other. First Wives Club. Wore the VHS tape out perhaps the greatest ensemble of mature ladies ensemble ever put to screen. I grew up with funny, amiable, best crash out actress of all time figure, Diane Keaton. And then as I got older, I discovered Annie Hall, I discovered Annie Hall, Diane Keaton, and Looking for Mr. Goodbar, Diane Keaton, and Reds, and The Godfather, and the Diane Keaton of Nancy Meyers, and the Diane Keaton of Francis Ford Coppola, the Diane Keaton of 70s paranoia, and the Diane Keaton of the most impeccably decorated romantic comedies imaginable. There was a Diane Keaton for everything. And then even when she wasn't in movies, when she, even on social media, like I follow her on Instagram, and the persona of Diane Keaton persisted so completely in forums where she was just herself all of the time. And it sounds like, to those who knew her, who have been posting beautiful tributes to her since her passing, Jane Fonda, Goldie Hawn, Nancy Meyers, reading, beautiful words about her from Al Pacino, just up and down the board legends. Meryl Streep, Martin Short, and Steve Martin in their tribute to her. It sounds like the Diane Keaton that we all kind of thought existed, this impossibly singular, eccentric, good-natured, incredibly diligent, working professional. Like, everything you thought was great about her was true. It sounds like it was really true. Diane Keaton was simply too much herself and too specific to have been one Diane Keaton for a certain group of people and another Diane Keaton for the rest of us. She was just always utterly, entirely the stunning, talented, big smiling fashion icon. What did Meryl Streep call her? The most clothed woman in the history of clothes at a tribute she did for her. Not too many years back. God, it's hard to know. It's hard to know, particularly, on the heels of Robert Redford passing. It's hard to know we can lose these people every time we are reminded of it. And damn it, if Diane Keaton is not one that hit me particularly hard. I took that one personally. So yeah, here's to Diane Keaton and the incredible 79 years she got, the parts of those 79 years she gave us. There will never be another, and thank God we get to revisit her for the rest of our lives in the art that she leaves behind. And that is our show. You can keep up with us wherever you get your podcasts. You can hit that follow button wherever you're listening to get every new episode in your feed as it drops. You can follow us to find out more on Instagram at Feeling Seen Pod. We are also on Blue Sky. Just search Feeling Seen. And if you want to follow me, I'm Jorcrew on Twitter and Blue Sky. I promise I'm going to start popping up there more. It's starting to feel like the conversation center that I need it to be. So I'm really going to put more effort in there. Our theme music is by Andrew Epen. This episode was produced by Marissa Flaxbart. Our senior producers are Kevin Ferguson and Laura Swisher, and this is a production of Maximum Fun.
Maximum Fun,
a worker-owned network
of artist-owned shows,
supported directly by you.